Okay, let's jump right in. We are doing a deep dive today into the sources covering, well, just one of the most compelling figures in the entire history of global liberation, Toussaint Louverture.
Absolutely. Leader of the Haitian Revolution,
Yeah.
which, stands alone as the only truly successful large-scale slave revolt in the Western Hemisphere.
Exactly. So our mission today isn't just about his military brilliance, which was considerable, but really digging into the almost impossible contradictory choices he faced after freedom was initially won.
Yeah, and to really get that, you first have to understand the stage. Saint-Domingue, as Haiti was called then under the French, wasn't just some island colony. It was, astronomically important.
You really can't overstate it.
No, it was the wealthiest, most profitable colony anywhere in the world at that time, bar none.
An absolute engine for France, right? Built entirely on this incredibly brutal system of slave labor. The sources, the numbers are just staggering.
They really are.
Yeah.
We're talking Saint-Domingue alone producing something like 60% of all the coffee consumed globally.
60%.
And maybe half of all the sugar. France's economic power, its prestige, so much of it rested on this one relatively small island.
Which makes Toussaint's own story even more remarkable given his starting point.
Right. He was born into slavery, but the sources do suggest his conditions were, let's say, less brutal and more fortunate than many. That's the phrase often used.
Okay.
And crucially, he actually managed to gain his freedom back in 1777. He was about 34 years old then.
So almost 15 years before the big revolution kicks off in 1791.
Exactly. And this is key. He lived under slavery. He knew that world intimately. But then he also lived as a free man, even owned some property for a time. He understood both realities.
He literally walked between those worlds, knew the plantation system from the inside, but also knew the desire for freedom, maybe even the complexities of being a free black man in that society.
That deep understanding, that duality you mentioned, it absolutely shaped his leadership later on. It gave him a perspective few others could have had.
Which I think leads us right into the central tension, the real paradox of his rule that we want to unpack.
The man who fought so fiercely for liberty, who wanted to preserve it at all costs,
Ends up implementing these incredibly harsh, really restrictive top-down policies that alienated many of the very people he'd fought to free.
That's the core of it. How does the liberator end up looking, to some, like a new kind of taskmaster? That's the tough question.
Okay, so let's trace that path. The revolution proper, the massive slave uprising, starts in 1791. What's Toussaint's first move? Is he immediately leading charges?
It's actually quite surprising and telling. One of his first documented actions wasn't attacking his former plantation, but helping his former master and his family escape the violence, get them safely off the island.
That suggests, well, it suggests a level of calculation maybe, or a personal code that went beyond just immediate revenge.
Pragmatism, perhaps? Or maybe a long-term vision even then. He only joined the main rebel forces after ensuring their safety.
And once he joins, his goal seems clear pretty early on. You have that famous proclamation from August 1793.
Yes, a powerful statement. He says, "I want liberty and equality to reign throughout Saint-Domingue." That's the banner he raises.
The ideal is set, but the reality on the ground was just chaotic, shifting alliances everywhere.
Oh, incredibly messy. You have multiple forces at play. The French trying to maintain control, Spanish forces encroaching, the British eventually invade.
And the rebels themselves weren't always unified.
Not at all. Toussaint, for instance, initially allies his forces with the Spanish.
Against the French.
Right, against the French Republic. He was using the European powers against each other, essentially. Whatever served the cause of liberation at that moment.
Until the French make a game-changing move.
Exactly. The pivot comes in 1794, when the French National Convention formally abolishes slavery throughout all its territories.
And that's when Toussaint switches sides.
Immediately, he rallies his forces, quite substantial by this point, to the French Republican cause. It shows, I think, that his primary loyalty wasn't to Spain or France, but to the principle of abolition.
That makes sense. Liberty and equality, like he proclaimed.
And he was also seeing, very clearly, the hypocrisy of some of the other groups involved. He noted in his letters around 1799 how the white planters, who initially might have liked some French Revolution ideals like representation.
They only wanted those ideals for themselves.
Precisely. They had no intention of dismantling the slave system that underpinned their wealth. Liberty for me, but not for thee.
And Toussaint saw them actively working to undermine the revolution from within, didn't he? Using divisions.
He did. He explicitly called it out. He said they used, and this is his phrase, Machiavelli's principle of divide and rule.
Okay, divide and rule. Who are they dividing?
Critically, they worked to split the alliance between the formerly enslaved black population, the vast majority, and the so-called men of color, or mulattoes.
Right, the population of mixed European and African descent. What was their status?
It was complicated. Many were free before the revolution, some were educated, owned property, had skills, and crucially, some were slaveholders themselves.
Ah, okay. So their interests didn't perfectly align with the enslaved masses.
Not always. And when the French government granted full political rights to free men of color in 1792, a major step, many of them felt their revolutionary goals were achieved. Toussaint observed that a lot of them essentially abandoned the cause of general emancipation at that point.
So Toussaint is fighting the Spanish, he's fighting the British when they invade, he's navigating treacherous alliances with the French, and he's dealing with these internal fractures within the revolutionary movement itself.
It's astonishing he held it all together. A multi-front war in every sense, military, political, social.
But he does. His military leadership seems undeniable in the sources.
Absolutely. Through incredible skill, strategy, and discipline, his forces composed largely of former slaves outmaneuvered and ultimately defeated both the Spanish and a major British expeditionary force. Tens of thousands of veteran British troops were defeated or succumbed to disease.
A huge blow to British power in the Caribbean.
Massive. Yeah. And by 1798, these victories essentially leave Toussaint as the de facto ruler of the colony. He's pushed out the foreign powers.
So, victory. Liberty secured, on paper at least. The former slaves are free. But now, the really hard part begins.
Now comes the impossible task. He's won the war, but he inherits an economy that is utterly devastated. Virtually dead is how some sources describe it.
Virtually dead. What does that mean in practical terms? Give us the numbers again, because they're just shocking.
They are. Think about those pre-war figures. The massive sugar and coffee exports. By 1795, after years of conflict, plantations being burned, workers fleeing, coffee exports had plummeted by 97.2%.
Okay, almost gone.
And sugar, the real engine of the old economy, down by a catastrophic 98.8%.
98.8%. It's basically zero. The entire economic basis of the colony, the thing that made it valuable, had evaporated.
Completely. You can't fund an army, you can't run a state, you can't import goods, you can't buy weapons to defend your new freedom if your main source of income has vanished.
And this is where Toussaint, the idealist, the liberator, meets Toussaint, the hard-nosed pragmatist.
It's a brutal collision. He reached a conclusion, maybe an unavoidable one in his eyes. To keep liberty, you need a strong military. To have a strong military, you need money, you need wealth.
And where could that wealth possibly come from quickly?
Only one place, he figured, exports. And large-scale exports meant restarting the plantations.
Bringing back the very system they fought to destroy.
Essentially, yes, the large-scale plantation system, which meant inevitably compelling the formerly enslaved people to go back to work on those same plantations.
That just sounds incredibly difficult to sell to people who just risked everything for freedom from those plantations. What was the alternative they wanted?
What most of the former slaves clearly desired was the freedom to not work on large plantations for export. They wanted small plots of land for themselves, to grow food for their families, maybe sell a little surplus locally, the yeoman farmer ideal.
Subsistence farming, freedom as autonomy, self-sufficiency.
Exactly. But Toussaint saw that model as, and this is a quote attributed to him, potentially sounding the death knell for the new state.
Why? Why did he think small farming would kill the nation?
His logic was, widespread subsistence farming generates very little surplus wealth for the state. No significant tax base, no export revenue. Without that revenue, how do you pay soldiers? How do you buy guns and cannons? How do you build forts? How do you defend against the inevitable French attempt to reconquer the island and reinstate slavery?
So for him, individual liberty expressed as small farming equaled national vulnerability.
That seems to have been his calculus. National security depended on economic output, and large-scale agriculture was the only way he sought to achieve that quickly.
Which leads directly to his most controversial policy, the forced labor decree of 1800. What did that actually entail?
It was stark. He essentially militarized agriculture. His policy centered on the militarization of Haitian society, as historians put it. Agriculture was declared the fundamental support of government.
Support of the government, okay.
And the foundation of commerce and wealth. And the way it was enforced was essentially military discipline applied to the fields.
So overseers, field workers, treated like soldiers.
Pretty much. Overseers and drivers were like NCOs, field workers like privates. They were legally bound to their plantations. They couldn't leave without permission, just like a soldier can't go AWOL.
And if they did leave, or refused to work.
Vagrancy, or leaving your assigned plantation, became a crime, punishable by arrest, imprisonment, or being forced onto public works projects. It was incredibly strict.
You can just imagine the reaction. You fight a revolution for freedom, and then you're told you must go back to the fields you can't leave under threat of punishment by the revolutionary government.
It's no wonder many former slaves felt betrayed. They described this new existence in sources as something that stank of slavery. It felt far too close to the life they thought they'd escaped. The lack of choice was galling.
A tragic paradox indeed. But did it work? From his pragmatic standpoint, did this harsh system revive the economy? Did it generate the wealth he thought was necessary?
The evidence suggests, yes, remarkably so. Toussaint did oversee a significant economic revival in a very short period. Production ramped up considerably.
Any numbers to back that up, like the sugar example?
Yeah, using sugar again.
Yeah.
Remember, it had collapsed to about 1.6 million pounds in 1795. By 1802, under Toussaint's system, it was back up to over 52 million pounds.
Wow. That's a huge jump, even if it wasn't back to the absolute peak colonial levels.
Exactly. It wasn't the old levels, but it was substantial. It was generating revenue, funding his administration, and crucially, his army.
And this economic recovery, this ability to produce goods again, presumably gave him leverage on the international stage.
Absolutely. He showed real diplomatic skill during this period. He just finished fighting and defeating the British, right?
Yeah.
And he turns around and negotiates a trade agreement with Britain and also with the United States under President John Adams. He needed buyers for all that reviving sugar and coffee.
So defeating enemies militarily, then immediately engaging them economically. Quite the political tightrope walker.
He really was. And he pushed back hard against European critics, too. There's a powerful letter he wrote to the French Directory back in 1797, responding to claims that the black leaders were ignorant and gross.
What was his argument?
He basically said, if we lack formal education, whose fault is that? It's the fault of the very people who denied it to us under slavery.
Turning the criticism back on the accusers.
Precisely. And he also pointed out the hypocrisy of European nations being shocked by revolutionary violence in Haiti when their own histories, he's clearly thinking of the French Revolution itself, were filled with turmoil and bloodshed in the struggle between despotism and liberty.
He was asserting the legitimacy of his government, of black leadership on the world stage, using their own revolutionary language against them.
But that very success, that growing autonomy, that independent foreign policy, trading with Britain and the U.S. while technically still being a French colony, this made powerful people very nervous.
Specifically, Napoleon Bonaparte, who was now rising to supreme power in France as first consul.
Exactly. Napoleon saw Toussaint not as a French governor, but as an independent power. Far too independent, untrustworthy, a potential rival even.
And Napoleon wasn't one to tolerate rivals or challenges to French authority.
Not at all. He made a decision. Toussaint had to go. So in 1802, Napoleon dispatched a massive military expedition under his brother-in-law, General Leclerc.
A huge fleet, thousands of veteran troops. What was Leclerc's mission?
Officially, it was to restore French authority. But secretly, the instructions were clear. Sideline Toussaint, dismantle his government, and critically begin the process of gradually reinstating slavery.
The ultimate betrayal of the revolution's promise.
It was. Toussaint fought back fiercely, but was eventually tricked, captured, and deported.
Arrested and shipped off to France.
Yes, imprisoned in a cold, damp fortress in the Jura Mountains. He died there less than a year later, in April 1803. Broken physically, perhaps, but his legacy was far from over.
Because Leclerc's mission ultimately failed, didn't it? Despite capturing Toussaint.
Failed spectacularly. Toussaint's capture, and crucially, the news leaking out about Napoleon's plan to bring back slavery, it reignited the resistance with incredible ferocity.
Who took over the fight?
Toussaint's second-in-command, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, a hardened military leader. He rallied the Haitian forces.
And the French faced other problems, too.
Yes, huge problems. They faced determined guerrilla warfare across the island, but they were also devastated by yellow fever. Disease wiped out thousands of French soldiers, including Leclerc himself. By late 1803, the French had to admit defeat and withdraw the remnants of their forces.
An incredible turnaround. Toussaint's foundation held.
It did. And that final, brutal struggle against the French attempt to re-enslave them led directly to the ultimate step.
Independence.
On January 1st, 1804, Dessalines declared Haiti an independent nation, the first free black republic in the world, and only the second independent nation in the Americas, after the United States.
Just an absolute monumental achievement built on Toussaint's complicated legacy.
It truly is. You have this arc. From slave to revolutionary general to statesman who uses sheer will and, yes, harsh economic pragmatism to rebuild a shattered nation, creating the conditions for that final independence, even though he didn't live to see it proclaimed.
So, boiling it all down, that central conflict seems unavoidable in his story. He felt he had to sacrifice the vision of freedom that the former slaves themselves wanted, that individual autonomy, the small farms.
In favor of national security and economic strength, which he believed could only come from restarting the large export plantations, enforced by military means.
He built a nation, but perhaps couldn't reconcile the people's idea of liberty with the economic structure he thought was needed to defend that nation.
He synthesized the state, maybe, but struggled to synthesize that state's survival with the immediate desires of its citizens for personal freedom from coercion, a profound tragedy within the triumph.
It really underscores a tough reality, maybe, that sometimes the act of organizing and defending freedom might seem to require, at least temporarily, denying some aspects of it. He was absolutely determined to make sure their liberty was permanent, that it couldn't be taken away again.
That seemed to be his driving motivation.
So here's something for you, the listener, to think about. If Toussaint's forced labor system had actually succeeded in the long run, if it had created sustained wealth and security that allowed Haiti to defend itself effectively for decades, would that eventual national prosperity and security have justified the initial cost in terms of immediate personal liberty for those workers?
It's a really difficult question.
It really is. Can lasting national liberation, true freedom for people, ever really be built using the same tools, the same structures of economic coercion that define the oppression they just overthrew? That's something to mull over.